Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, all. It's Bear here. I'd like to welcome you to my YouTube channel, A Box with No Lid. A channel I'm creating and created not just to bring the awareness of the lived reality trauma creates, but I really want to get what I've learned through my own personal experiences and as well as a practitioner and as an advocate out there into the world with the hope that it is useful and helpful. Now, yes, this is the next video in the adoption series, and I want to, in this video and maybe a couple more, start to really address a large component of the fog, which is our narrative. I refer to it in a lot of videos because it's our story. Whenever we want to heal from trauma, whenever we want to heal anything, it's our narrative that we're going to be negotiating with. Because the way we heal from trauma is we need to co-regulate with other people's nervous systems. We need to feel that close a connection to our body will go, I can learn from their neurophysiological responses to teach mind and re-regulate. That is how we're designed. Now, that is coming from when we're an infant with our mother and with our father growing up. That process is how we heal. And it is very difficult in a non-familiar or non-relationship sense to get that close, especially in this modern day world. So our narrative is what we're going to be negotiating with to allow people that close. And when we've gone through trauma, that adds even more layers of difficulty. So we need to understand our narrative and our story so that we can negotiate and create paths to build that kind of connection. Our narrative is basically how we worked out how it all works, everything we've come from and everything we are, when we're 3 to 5 years old. How we make sense of what is going on around us, our family, where we've been, how we're being raised, and where we come from. 3 to 5 years of age. Really get your head around it. It is not, well, we can put it off because of some stuff, so it's going to happen later. No, it happens. It is embedded in to the core of our story between 3 to 5 years of age. Now, when you look at this from a child removal perspective for foster care or for adoption, there is such a massive amount of complexity added for a very young child to make sense of. And this alters and structures our narrative with a little bit more severity in need for it to remain intact. What we've decided by 5 years of age needs to remain intact because it is all we've got. What would normally be placed into the biological aspect of belonging to a family, the mannerisms and all this reassurance that we non-verbally get being part of a biological family, what we don't get in a non-biological family, adds to the need for our narrative to be intact. Our neurophysiological aspects align to that need for it to be intact. And a lot of the time, and what I've noticed for a lot of adoptees that I know, the lives they live, the lives I've lived, come from that base and don't change no matter how hard we try. And that comes down to that transference of the reassurance we would normally have gotten biologically through all the markers of mannerisms, facial structure and vocal tone and all the stuff that we're biologically designed to have when we're raised with our biological family. Because that is not present, we transfer that need and all that structure of dependency onto our narrative on how we make sense of why that's happening. So we lay on into the avatar that we create to try to be part of the family that's raising us all this importance for our narrative to match theirs and our narrative to be right, to be approved. In a biological sense, a person's narrative doesn't necessarily feed the approval mark. In an adoption or a foster care placement, if you're going to feel part of and be accepted and not have this distancing and arguing and trouble and drama, you have to align your narrative to what they want or your interpretation of what they want. So we shape it, we mold it, And we create all this importance around it because it is the only evidence we have that we are part of the family that is raising us. And when we're challenged of why we don't look like the people raising us, or, all the circumstances that a lot of adoptees have when you're looking at documentation. So our narrative, again, is the only evidence we have that we are part of, that we can felt sense be part of the family that's raising us. There is a key understanding here, and that is the importance of non-verbal reassurance. And that is something that the reason I'm making this video now is in the last couple of weeks I've had discussions with an adoptee, and their narrative is completely opposite to mine. And my narrative, my experience and the way I view things is a direct threat to theirs. And that importance, that the message I was trying to convey was around this biological reassurance and how we've adapted that because we've had to. And because my narrative was a direct threat to this person's, to hers, I had to be aware of that. And if I wasn't aware of my narrative, as I've seen happen all the time, my narrative is under threat, I have to prove it right. Their narrative is under threat, they have to prove it right. And it's one beat the other. But because I'm aware of it, and I was aware that she needed to have her narrative remain intact, and it's not my place to break it. It is actually wrong for me to break it. I had to steer around, and I was aware, and yes, it was challenging, and yes, it was uncomfortable. But the awareness helped negate the harm that I would have taken on board through choosing to allow her to remain in her state and not prove mine to where she accepted it. And that's one of the gifts understanding our narrative can give. It takes the personal nature of when our narrative is threatened out of the equation. And being an adoptee, our narrative gets threatened all the time. Once the fog starts to collapse and the fog breaks, that is a key part of it. You see, our narrative collapses. Everything we thought we were, everything we thought we were going to do and be, and all of that falls down. And that is devastating. And that is one of the most devastating parts associated with the collapse of the fog. Because we built this person to try to be part of a family that's not ours. And when that all collapses, who are we? We've got to go back to an infant, who we were born to be, and try to make sense of that. Or we just live in a void, in a grey, and try to build, some semblance of a life in between. This is why understanding our narrative is key. Because if we want to understand the structures of the fog, and if we want to create therapy bases to work with the fog, therapists need to understand that when you collapse the fog, and if you're going to heal adoption and removal trauma, you're going to collapse the fog. You need to build up the narrative, the story of that person, who they were born to be and where they came from, and all the components that we would normally have if we were raised in biological family with the narrative we would have created being raised within it. Need to be there, the good, the bad, and the ugly parts as well. We were born, and everything that crossed the placenta and epigenetics and all this prepared us to be a person to try to survive not only in the world that our parents grew up in, and what we were being born into, but also with the understandings of where we come from. And like I've said in numerous videos, by removing a child from that and putting them in a situation where they have to adapt to be part of a non-biological family, that changes all of that. And that stuff doesn't go away. It remains there, and it gets absorbed as part of our narrative. And we try to solve problems that don't exist, or we get determined to fix problems that don't exist, or we're hyper-vigilant and make problems that are there more serious than they actually are, because we are driven to fix the problems of our biological family. But we were raised in a non-biological family. And if you can start to tell the difference between the two and really understand this confusing mess that I am desperately trying to explain, it starts to make sense, the priorities that we set, our ethics, our moralities, the way we view right and wrong, and what is important and what isn't, what we notice in interactions with people and what we don't, what we seek and what we avoid, all these components that is our narrative, and why we do it. Why children that are removed have these predispositions that are different from children that aren't. All this constructed narrative comes from a 3 to 5-year-old trying to make sense of why their situation is the way it is. And you have it from a 3 to 5-year-old's interpretation and perspective. But the critical thing is that child's perspective becomes core, because we're accessing core being. We're not going through any adult filters, any life experience filters. It's not just words. It is real. It is absolute real. And it needs to be valued as such. And when therapists start to work with this stuff, you really need to understand you're negotiating with a 3 to 5-year-old narrative if you want to actually heal trauma. And the severities that come with that, all the reactions and responses are so full-bodied and full-beinged that come from that. Another difficulty, and I'll only touch on this briefly, is when our narrative is threatened, we need to understand that even though it feels personal, it isn't. And it comes down to us learning the skill sets to articulate better without taking it personal when our narrative is threatened. Because in the world that is adoption, I've watched it happen over and over again, because everybody's perspective in adoption is different. Everybody's experience is different. The only way we're going to heal and get what we need to be supported to is to come together. Every time we try to come together in the larger groups, all these different narratives compete, and it tears apart. We see the same thing happen when you bring in lower socioeconomic difficulties, when you're bringing in DV survivors or indigenous communities. There's all this competitiveness of trauma, competitiveness of narrative. Now, if we understand that when our narrative is threatened, it's not a personal attack, it's just a belief competing against a belief, we can understand that if we step back and we can create a round table where it's an ecology that we're creating, not this is right, this is wrong, we can start to approach things a little differently. And as I said, one of the hopes of this is the expansion of the awareness around the implications of child removal and adoption and placement, so that greater discussions out there in the world can take place, so that it is taken more serious, the consequences and harm, and not just put the blame on the child when the child goes wrong, or as the world sees it, turns bad. When that narrative becomes the world hates me, I hate the world. I really hope this conversation, this video makes sense, and it is valued. And I will endeavor over the next few videos to explain it a little more and from some different angles, to try to get this understanding across. Because it is key not only to our healing, but also to our understanding of who we are, what we're trying to make sense of, and why we feel the way that we do, and what drives the feelings that we have. I love you guys' comments and feedback. Please be mindful, please be safe, please be respectful, and I'll see you all next time.